Hello friends. Today we're going to discuss about the Transgender Persons Act 2019. I'm Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, working at National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore. In this video, I'll be discussing about the basic concepts of gender, sex, transgender, and various other terms, and how they have evolved over a period of time. I'll be introducing this legislation, the Transgender Act of 2019, how the transgender certificate and the gender certificate issued under this legislation, what are the welfare measures have been promised under the legislation, and finally, critiquing about this legislation. Let's understand the basic concept. What do you mean by sex? How does it differ from gender? Sex refers to the biological differences between male and females. That includes chromosomes, hormonal profiles, internal and external reproductive organs. Further, the sex is usually assigned during birth. It includes both physical characteristics as well as internal reproductive organs such as testes and also ovaries, uterus. That means sex is more of physical in nature, whereas gender refers to the roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. It is a social and cultural construct influenced by expectation and norms. Unlike biological sex, which is based on physical attributes, gender encompasses a wider spectrum of identity and roles. In simple word, sex is between the legs, gender is between the ears. That means what we think and what we impose in a society, that is social and cultural construct. The gender is a wider term now. Sex is very narrow and physical construct at this point of time. But however, over a period of time, the term gender fluidity is gaining importance. Let's understand this traditional model. In a given society, the majority of them believe there is only two sex, male and female. That is based on genitalia, internal reproductive organs, and external. If you look at the genetics, male as XY chromosome, female as XX. Gender expression with regard to male is masculine, with regard to female is feminine. Sexual orientation, the male invariably should get attracted to female, and the female should get attracted to male. That is the classical model, what we see and what we believe, and also majority in the society accepts it. But however, the nature also has formed some other groups. Let's understand them. Although we think about there is male and female, there is something called as intersexed. That is neither the male nor the female. It is not only seen in human beings but also across various other species also. We believe XY and XX, but invariably the same nature also produces XYY, XXY. That means the nature itself may be at fault, or else it is the way of expression, the way the nature says. Invariably, the gender expression we thought of masculine and feminine. We also know about androgynous. That means some of the male may have feminine quality, and similarly, the female may have also male qualities. Sexual orientation. The male getting attracted to male or else female. Sometimes he may be attracted to both. That means gender fluidity comes into picture. Some of them may say, I do not get attracted neither male or female. So the orientation varies over a period of time. That means that is the term we call it as gender fluidity. If you look at this model, the male, intersexed, and female, that means the looking at the genetics, the male female may have various genetics combination. Further, gender expression can also change based upon masculinity, androgynous, feminine, and orientation also can be any of them, neither, asexual, towards male or female. That means whatever we know about male female is not true bipartisan. That is not the true division. The nature also forms various other combination of male and female, and also so-called transgender. Now the question is it the transgender a mental illness? In simple word, no. Transgender is an expression of a gender within the nature ambit. The transgender are susceptible for human rights violations simply because they are in minority in number. They do not belong to the majority. Hence, they are discriminated, stigmatized. We do not give any of our house for their rent. We invariably protest them having any of their own residence. We do not give job, do not help them to earn their livelihood, and also even their own family member outcast them. And there is a poor family support, social support, and invariably their marriages are not recognized, and hence they do not have their own family, no access to healthcare. They're not welcomed in any public places, and at the same time, since they do not have marriage or children, their future is at bleak during the geriatric time. Hence, because of all these violations, they are high susceptible to mental illness and physical health. Mental illness such as depression, anxiety, drug abuse, alcohol use, tobacco use, anxiety disorder, adjustment disorder, suicidal attempt, death by suicide. Similarly, many of the transgender also compelled to do sexual activity for livelihood. Hence, they are susceptible to HIV and AIDS and other forms of sexually transmitted diseases. Invariably, they cannot go to any police. The violence is very common against transgender people, and further, they want to undergo sexual reassignment surgery. And in such a scenario, the complication and infections are very common. And many a time there are no beds available in the hospital. And now the question is, why do they choose to be as a transgender? It is not by choice, my dear friends. It is the nature which has created them like that. That means the way the nature has created, like the way you are white, black, male, female, with your own identity. Similarly, transgenders are also created by the same nature and the same God. They are also product of our nature. Transgender issue starts from the early childhood, maybe in the adolescent, or maybe in the young adulthood. Hence, looking at all of this discrimination, which was wide from womb to tomb, the government of India came up with a landmark legislation called as Transgender Persons Act 2019. That is, Protection of Rights of the Transgender Persons Act 2019. This legislation was passed on 5th December 2019. And the preamble of this legislation is very clear. The preamble says to provide protection of rights of persons with transgender and their welfare. This legislation is very small, which has 23 clauses or section and 9 chapters. Let's look into each one of them. By definition, the transgender person means, as per this legislation, a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to the person at birth and includes trans men or trans women, whether or not such person has undergone sexual reassignment surgery or hormonal therapy or laser therapy or such other therapy. Person with intersex variations, genderqueer, and persons having such socio-cultural identities such as Kinnar, Hijra, Aravani, and Jogata are considered as transgender. Unfortunately, many of the transgender are not happy with this definition. They do not want intersex to be added here. That means there is infight between the transgender. What does it mean? Many of them believe the transgender means only after sexual reassignment surgery or else after attaining nirvana they can be considered as transgender. However, the law is very clear. Irrespective of their surgery or medical intervention, if they want to consider themselves as a transgender, they are can be considered. That means it is self-proclaimed as a transgender. And invariably intersex have been added, and genderqueer, that is gender fluidity, also has been considered here. Further, what does it mean by intersex variation? Person with intersex variation means a person who at birth shows a variation or her on his or her primary sexual characteristics, external genitalia, chromosomes or hormones from normative standard of male or female body. That means there is a variation. Although the child looks having a genitalia of a vulva, that is female, vagina kind of thing, but internal reproductive organs can be testes. Similarly, a child can be seen as a male with a hypertrophic clitoris looking as a penis, but invariably the child may have uterus and also ovary. That means intersex is during the birth, invariably because of characteristics of external genitalia and chromosomes do not match each other. If you look at the section 3, here the chapter 2 talks about prohibition against discrimination. Here, the Act clearly says no person or establishment shall discriminate, deny, or discontinue or unfair treatment during education of a transgender person, employment, healthcare services, using public amenities, denial of right to movement, owning a property, renting a property, government or private establishment in that place, they cannot be discriminated. If you look at the section 4 to 7, that is chapter 3, discusses about the recognition of identity of a transgender person. This is the chapter 3, which is highly controversial and at the same time where the social welfare measures are given because of how they are identified, how they are certified, and how the ID cards are given. Now let's look into the section 4, recognition of identity of a transgender person. Section 4 clearly says a transgender person shall have a right to be recognized as such in accordance with the provision of the Act. A person recognized as a transgender under subsection 1 shall have right to self-perceived gender identity. That means he can identify himself in whatever gender he wants to call himself. That is, for his identity purpose. Suppose he wants to have a transgender certificate. Under section 5, application for certificate of identity has to be done. A transgender person will make an application to a district magistrate for issuing a certificate of identity of a transgender person and also transgender certificate. If a child is minor, the parents or the legal guardians has to give application. If you look at the section 6, how the certificate is issued, the district magistrate, after receiving the application as per section 5, need to issue transgender certificate and ID card. The gender of transgender person shall be recorded in all official document in accordance with the certificate issued under this subsection. A certificate issued to a person under subsection 1 shall confer the rights and a proof of recognition of his identity as a transgender person. That means if you want the transgender certificate and ID and also the welfare measure, you need to apply. Now the question is, just because the DM, that the district magistrate gives the ID card or the certificate, doesn't mean that he's the only person who is transgender. No. As per section 4, any person, if he believes that he is a transgender, can self-proclaim himself as a transgender. He need not require the DM certificate. This district magistrate certificate and the ID card is basically for social welfare measures only. Let's be very clear about this. It does not mean a person who is having a transgender belief, he does not want to apply for the certificate or the ID card. He is free to do that. He need not apply, but he can continue to proclaim himself as a transgender. Now, the section 7 talks about change in gender. Once the transgender certificate is issued, and if the transgender person undergoes surgery for gender change to male to female or female to male, and if that person has undergone surgery, medical intervention, along with the certificate issued by the medical superintendent or the chief medical officer of that hospital, and applies to the district magistrate along with the transgender ID card and the medical superintendent or the chief medical officer certificate. That means he has applied for the change of gender certificate. Please remember, this legislation does not compels for a government hospital certificate. That means it can be from even private hospital also. The simple reason is sexual reassignment surgery is not available in all the general hospital or else in public hospital. Most of the hospitals who are doing SRS, that is sexual reassignment surgery, are private hospital. Hence, there is no compulsion to look for government certificate from the government hospital. Once the district magistrate receives the application, transgender certificate which was issued and transgender ID along with the chief medical officer's certificate, now he is mandated to issue gender change of gender certificate and ID. The person who has been issued a certificate of identity under section 6 shall be entitled to change the first name in the birth certificate and also the gender in all the government documents, provided that such change in gender and the issue of revised certificate shall not affect the rights and entitlement under this legislation. What does it mean? Simple way. The transgender ID, transgender certificate is given under section 4 and 5. Invariably, if a person undergoes gender ID or gender certificate, now he is no more a transgender. Whether since he has become a male or a female as he wishes, does he mean that he is not a transgender? No. This legislation clearly says once he has proclaimed himself as a transgender, he will be a transgender, irrespective whether he undergoes sexual reassignment surgery or medical intervention. Although he has undergone this SRS and medical intervention, and the gender change certificate has been issued, gender ID certificate has been issued, he will continue to entitle, the entitlement of social welfare measure continues to exist under this legislation. Let's summarize the certificate and ID is given here. Under section 456, certificate of transgender and transgender ID card is given. Under section 7, certificate of change of gender and gender ID card is given. Now let's move into section 8. Section 8, that is chapter 4, talks about welfare schemes. Here it says government, that is invariably the state government and also the central government, will take step to secure full and effective participation of transgender person so that they are included in the mainstream society. Hence, the government shall formulate social welfare measure and also they need to rescue the transgender person, rehabilitate and protect them. And these welfare measures should be non-discriminatory and non-stigmatizing manner. Section 9 to 12, that is chapter 5, anti-discrimination and grievance which needs to be established. Section 9 talks about non-discrimination in employment. Just because somebody has put their name as a male or female along with transgender as a gender, you cannot refuse to give them a job. Not only job, promotion, and other entitlements. Further, obligation of the establishments. Either it is a government establishment, private establishment cannot discriminate them. Grievance redressal mechanism. There should be a person called as a complaint officer to deal with the complaints relating to the violation of the Transgender Act or the persons with transgenders violation in any establishment. Right of residence. That means transgender child or the transgender person has right to stay within the family residence. Why is this? Section 12 has been specifically mentioned. Whenever a child recognizes as a transgender or else recognizes as an other gender which is not conforming with the child's birth gender, Invariably, the family will beat them, and if they do not child accept, the child will be thrown out of the house. Here, this section 12 clearly says transgender child, transgender person cannot be evicted from the house where they are residing with the family. That means the family cannot just push them away. For example, if the family members are unable to take care of the transgender person, then the court has to hand over such children to the child welfare committee, and the welfare committee will take appropriate action to provide care and protection of such children. Now let's move into section 13 to 15. That is chapter 6, which discusses about education, health and social security. Section 13, that is, all state government has an obligation of educational institutions to provide inclusive education to transgender person. That means just because the child is a transgender, no school can refuse admission, education, and it has to be inclusive. Further, all transgender persons should have vocational training and self-employment opportunities. Further, this legislation casts obligation both on the central government and the state government for right to access for healthcare, such as HIV and AIDS treatment, hormonal therapy, sexual reassignment surgery, and a health manual for sexual reassignment surgery needs to be drafted either by the central government or the state government. Medical curriculum in the MBBS and post graduation needs to be amended so that the transgender health needs to be inclusive. Access to healthcare should be made available. Health insurance for all transgender should be available across all health insurance, both in public and private sector. If you look at this section 16, that is chapter 7, talks about the establishing National Council for Transgender Person. Here, the chairperson will be the Union Minister of Social Justice and Empowerment. Vice President is Minister of State of Social Justice and Empowerment. Secretary, Joint Secretary will be the Member Secretary. Representative of, that is basically Joint Secretary and above, from the Ministry of Health, Home, Housing, Urban, Minority Committee, Minority Ministry, HRD Ministry, Labor and various. And also representative from National Human Rights Commission, and also National Commission for Women, and also North East West Zone regional representative should be there. 5 transgender members along with 5 experts from transgender community or NGOs need to be there. Section 17 talks about function of this National Council for Transgender Person. They advise the Government of India, they monitor various policies, welfare measure, and also they will readdress the grievance of transgender community and also transgender person. Not only that, if there are any functions which are given by the government to this council, will be their functional obligation. Section 18 talks about offenses and penalties, that is chapter 8. The offenses which have been enumerated under this section are forced labor, bonded labor, denial of transgender persons right to passage to a public amenities, places, obstructing them, forcing or cause of transgender person to leave a household, village, or their place of residence. Further, harm or injuries or endangering the life, safety, health, or well being, whether mental or physical, of a transgender person, or tends to act including physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse. The punishment is 6 months to 2 years, and it is with fine. Unfortunately, the physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse have not been defined under this legislation. And finally, the chapter 9 talks, that is miscellaneous, that is 19 to 23 sections. Section 19 talks about the grants will be given by the central government to the National Council for Persons with Transgender. Similarly, Section 20 act in derogation of any other law. That means this is a supplementary law. It does not derogate any other law. Any other law which is there existing will prevail along with this law. Section 21 is protection of action taken in good faith. Section 22, it is the power of appropriate government to make rules. That means in the federal structure, where social welfare measures, labor, housing, many of these comes under the concurrent list and state list. Hence, the state government can make their own rules and pass it as per their legislation in the state. Further, power to remove difficulties is the final section. This is about the legislation. On August 21st, 2020, under Section 16, National Council for Transgender has been already been established. Further, on 2020, Transgender Persons rules have also been notified and gazetted. Let's look into these rules. As I mentioned, on 25th September 2020, Transgender Persons Rules 2020 has been clearly gazetted and notified. Now let's discuss about how the rules clearly indicates certification of transgender and also ID card. Certification of change of gender and ID card is issued. If you look at the legislation, section 4 to 7 is basically about how to certify. Section 456 talks about transgender certificate and ID card. Section 7 talks about certification of change of gender and gender ID card. Now let's look into the how the transgender certificate and ID card is issued as per rule number 3. Under rule number 3, the transgender person needs to fill the form number 1 and submit to the district magistrate. It can be online, it can be by post. Invariably, once it is made online, invariably the law says that it has to be online only. But however, the state government can consider it can be online and also in person. This is how the form number 1 looks. Once the application is submitted to the district magistrate, as per rule number 4, it clearly says that the transgender person also need to execute an affidavit declaring that he is a transgender person, that is male to female transgender or female to male transgender under form number 2. When he is issuing or executing this affidavit, there is no need of any medical certificate, any certificate from psychiatrist or from a psychologist. This is a self-declared affidavit. I'm repeating, there is no need of any medical certificate for transgender certificate and ID card. It is clearly written in rule number 4. This is how the affidavit 2, that is form number 2, the affidavit which needs to be executed by the transgender person. No need of any medical certificate, psychiatric certificate, or a psychological report. Okay? Once the form number 1, form number 2 is received by the district magistrate. Now, under the rule number 5, under section 6 of the Act, the district magistrate has to issue the transgender certificate and ID within 30 days of receiving the application. It does not say working days, or does not include holidays. It says within 30 days. That means it includes holidays also. Let me be very clear about this. District magistrate has to issue transgender certificate or ID card within 30 days. That is as per rule number 5. This is how the form number 3, where certificate of transgender is given. Form number 5, transgender ID card, which is issued. That means the district magistrate has to issue 2 important things. One is transgender certificate, transgender ID card. That is within 30 days. Now, the certificate of change in gender, as per rule number 6 and section 7 of the Act, certificate of change in gender. Once the transgender person has received his transgender certificate and ID card, and he undergoes sexual reassignment surgery. Now, he needs to take the medical certificate from the person who has done the surgery and apply using form number 1, and also he needs to give the copies of the transgender certificate and ID card to the district magistrate. Once the district magistrate receives form number 1, transgender certificate and ID card, now he needs to issue the gender change certificate within 15 days. Again, it does not say the working days. So within 15 days, the DM has to issue the certificate. Now, this is the form number 1 which he has to fill. Now, how the certificate of gender ID is given as per rule number 7 and the section 7 of the Act. As per the form number 4, gender change certificate has to be issued along with form number 6, gender ID card has to be given. Suppose if the district magistrate rejects the application, he needs to communicate this. There is a rejection of his application to the transgender person within 30 days. Once the rejection occurs, he needs to give a reason for that. Now, the transgender has 60 days to rectify the application, and again, he can apply to the district magistrate. Again, it is rejected. Then, the transgender person has to appeal to the higher authorities as per the state rules, that telling that, yes, this is the appellate authority. At this point of time, the appellate authority is not there. Invariably, they may have to appeal to the High Court. Or else, some of the state government may take a proactive measure and consider who will be the appellate authority. Now let's look into the Annexure 1. These are the certificates the transgender person can change, or else the gender change can occur in all these certificates which are government official. It from the birth certificate, caste certificate, education certificate, Aadhaar card, PAN card, driving license, all of them have been mentioned here. And only the name and the gender will be changed. The serial number which existed earlier will continue to exist. There is no need of giving a new serial number. Suppose the marks card has some X number. On the same X number marks card, without changing the serial number, mentioning the transgender ID card, or maybe the gender change ID card and certificate number to be mentioned, and the name and gender can be changed. Now let's look into the Annexure 2. Annexure 2 talks about various welfare schemes. It talks about access to health. At least one government hospital in a state should be enabled with SRS. Further, state medical insurance should cover SRS, hormonal therapy, laser therapy, counseling, and various health issues related to transgender. Medical insurance and government health insurance should cover transgender person. All healthcare facilities need to have a separate ward for transgender person. Invariably, none of the medical colleges, either in the government or in the private, do not have transgender ward. Access to education. All state government make sure there is a scholarship for transgender students, and they are not removed from the college or school just because they are transgender kids. Protection against ragging. Further, facilitation of accommodation in the hostel, schooling of the transgender person, and also various other inclusive procedures need to be established. Access for housing, affordable housing, shelters and community centers for the transgender risks or youth who are at risk. Access to sanitation facilities and safe drinking water should be done for transgender people. Welfare measure. Universal access to food security schemes provision of ration cards. Although below poverty line card is mentioned there now, as per this legislation, all transgenders should be entitled to get BPL card so that they get food security measures, pension for the all transgender, especially aged, disabled, vulnerable transgender person, old age and retirement homes for transgender people, public transport so that they have harassment free zone in all public places, and in places where they have been given a free transportation should be made available, economic support, universal coverage of life insurance, access to banking, financial services, free loan, at the same time microfinancing, formation of self-help groups for transgender, explicit inclusion of transgender person in Manrega and various other government schemes so that their economic inclusion occurs. Now let's critique about this Transgender Act 2019. Positively, the first time the government has acknowledged we have transgender in our society and their non-discrimination, non-stigmatizing environment has to be there has been clearly written in the law. Social welfare measures have to be given by the state and also the central government. Transgender certificate and ID card, gender change certificate and ID card. State can amend their rules based upon the federal structure so that they can provide more measures and protection of the transgender person. Government documents such as birth certificate and various other certificates can be amended under this legislation. Now let's look into the negative aspects. Many of the transgender are unhappy. Why should a district magistrate should recognize them as a transgender? It is self-proclaimed. Of course, this law clearly says about the ID for the purpose of social welfare measures. If a transgender wants to proclaim himself as a transgender and does not want any social welfare measure, he need not take any social welfare benefit under this legislation. That means this legislation is for protection of rights and also provision of social welfare measures. Suppose if the rights is violated, just because he does not have certificate or ID card doesn't mean that they do not come under this ambit of this legislation. The ID card and the certificate is basically for social welfare measures only. The transgender self proclamation of their gender is that is required. Many transgender are unhappy with the inclusion of intersex. Further, many of the transgender people are also unhappy just because somebody says that they are transgender should not be included. They say they have to mandatorily need to undergo sexual reassignment surgery. That is their clear cut vocalization telling that don't include those people who people they say that they are transgender and they do not want to undergo surgery or medical intervention. Further, the transgender community is unhappy with the penalties 6 months to 2 years. For sexual abuse, only 2 years? That is a question they are asking. Invariably, the legislation is very clear. This is a supplementary legislation. It is not with derogation with any other law. Invariably, if a transgender person is raped, where will they be appealing? Whether it will be considered as a rape? No. Bharati Nyaya Samhita very clearly says a male can only rape a female. At the same time, if a transgender person rapes a woman, will he be considered as a man? Is a question which needs to be answered over a period of time. But however, transgender community is unhappy with the penalties only for 2 years. Further, many of them are unhappy if somebody misuses the transgender certificate or gender change certificate. What is the penalty has not been clearly mentioned in this legislation. However, although it is a rights, no compelling obligations have been casted upon the social welfare department. These are rights only on paper. If the rights are not given, What is the punishment has not been clearly mentioned. Further, this legislation does not talk about marriage and adoption. Further, no funds have been allocated or earmarked per year. To conclude, my dear friends, this is the first step with regard to acknowledging and mainstream the transgender in our society. There are clear-cut welfare measures have been listed. Although there is still a long way to go with regard to marriage, adoption, available of job, education reservation, and finally, this may be just a law. The society needs to accept them. They are human beings. They are one among all of us. To finally, with regard to certificate, Section 456 talks about transgender certificate and also ID card. Section 7 talks about gender change certificate and gender change ID card. Thank you very much for giving your valuable time. Stay safe.